In 1989, the Australian Soccer Federation decided to shift the National Soccer League from winter to summer to make better use of ground facilities, attract more fans in warmer weather, and escape the media domination of the AFL and the NRL. According to modern retelling by the Federation, now known as Football Australia, the league saw an instant boost in average crowd attendances, and in the year 2000 had a record crowd of 43,000 in the grand final between Perth Glory and Wollongong Wolves. In the 36 years that have since passed, Australian football looks very different, yet familiar frailties persist. Inappropriate stadia, barring a few exceptions, remain a critical issue facing the top flight. Crowds are down roughly 40% from their peak in the mid-2010s, and mainstream media continues to neglect football, seemingly regardless of competition. And the economic revolution of football presents new challenges as well. How are we optimising our league for transfer revenue? Are we connecting the A-League efficiently with the tiers below? And what does being an active member of the Asian football landscape actually look like? Is ditching some of the answer? Who knows? So let's talk about it on the Roundball Australia podcast. My name is Lachie and joining me today is Jacob Stevens. Jacob, this has been a conversation and a discussion that's kind of gripped at least the communications online of Australian football over the last few days. I think it's great. I love when these things pop up because it gives us an opportunity to talk about the big issues in the game, which I really, really love doing, and breaking them down and kind of analysing the different sides, the pros and cons, and what the good decisions may be, because I think the more that we have these conversations, the more that we're talking about them, the better the game is in the long run.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't remember talking about it really at length on the podcast in the past either, which is, it's always fun to touch on something new, even if it's something we've had discussions about in the past, and it's something that's always kind of in, social media. People are always bringing up ideas with how to fix the Australian footballing calendar, but, there's so many different ideas out there floating around. Obviously the one that's really sparked a lot of the recent conversation is Adam Peacock writing about the issue and attempting to kind of draw like a causal relationship between playing in hot weather and perhaps a stunt on player development that you wouldn't get if you played in winter, and then that means that there's less money coming into the league because transfers are a little bit that the fees are a little bit lower than they would be elsewhere in the world, which is, I think it's an interesting thought, right? And I really appreciate an attempt to actually try and justify that positioning, and then offer the solution of, well, maybe it's a case of we're running a calendar year season rather than your kind of traditional over the year break over the new year, which is what most of the world does. Japan obviously now are the latest country to make that move in an attempt to align their calendar with the rest of the world. So it's interesting now that there's a discussion here of doing the opposite, right, and going the other way and back to winter. But there's obviously, it kind of makes sense in some regards. Cooler weather is always great. It is a winter sport after all, or at least you know. I don't think you can really classify it as a winter sport anymore, because it is one that is and just can be played in all weather, and the World Cup has almost always been in summer anyway. So it's, it's kind of a year-round sport, to be honest. And I like actually what Joey Lynch said on the Suited and Booted podcast a couple of weeks ago when he was on, about how no sport is like seasonal anymore, right? It's always 365. The news cycle is constant. There's always stuff going on. If it's not games being played, it's transfers or trades in some sports and drafts in others and things like that. So yeah, I don't think that, the weather that the sport's being played in at its peak is necessarily the season that it belongs in. But anyway, yeah, it's an interesting discussion, and I'm sure we'll break it down a little bit more, but I don't know if switching the calendar is going to solve any problems more than it's going to just make a lot of them.
Well, of course, like, one thing we have to keep in mind is, like, full on, like, switching the calendar is one of many options that we can change the calendar, right?
Yeah.
And we're going to talk about some of those options and break down the pros and cons. And again, I just want to reiterate, like, how much personally I love this conversation. I love going big picture. I remember a couple of months ago, you guys all got a notification in the WhatsApp group because I'd like scribbled down a diagram of what like an Australian football pyramid could look like. Today, for those of you watching along on YouTube or the video podcast,
I thought you printed it off. I was like, is that the same one?
No, this is a different one, but this has like all the months of the year and when I think different leagues could be played and how it could work.
You have more time on your hands than you know what to do.
I probably do. Like if for anyone who went to school and like scribbled over there, like, Dream 11, and, Henri and all, all the Ronaldo, Messi, whatever. This is my version of the classic 11 is kind of making these Australian football landscape things. But anyway, breaking it down. So as you say, Adam Peacock's piece for Football 360 that was published on Wednesday was the crux of where all this conversation has come from. And he was highlighting the latest FIFA transfer window report where Australia's exports represented just 0.06% of the $18 billion market that is football transfers worldwide, which is a ridiculous figure, $18 billion. That I don't even think that counts in like salaries of players being paid, right?
No, that's literally just the fees, and it doesn't include your agent fees either, which is another thing that's rising drastically over the last couple of years, is agents taking big cuts too. So that's just for the payment of the player to sign the paperwork, basically. It's a crazy number.
It's crazy, yeah. So just 11 million for Australia in the 12 months of that particular report, so 0.06%. And obviously Australia does not represent only 0.06% of the quality and the talent in world football. So the crux of this piece is we should be getting more of that, and how do we do that? So Adam's thesis is that, as you say, Jacob, the limitations of playing in summer decrease the perceived intensity and speed and pressing efforts, etc., of Australian players from scouts and technical teams watching from overseas, and therefore devaluing Australian players in terms of transfer revenue. And especially, emphasis on the data-driven scouting world that we live in at the moment, that we should potentially look at changes in terms of solutions to make sure that, if we're not playing as much in those warmer months, and then those numbers and the football, I think we saw this during COVID as well. I think it's kind of undisputed that the football would look better in winter if you're not having players running around in 35-degree heat, right? Yeah. We can agree on that.
Well, theoretically, yes, because then it comes into the other factors of, pouring rain, rubbish pitches that have been chewed up by rugby league and God knows whatever else is on in the winter. And just, so you win some, you lose some.
If that was the one variable that changed, the temperature.
Just, it's 10 degrees cooler all the time, yeah, sure, the football would be higher quality. But my problem with it is it feels very kind of reductionist, because he even touches on it brilliantly, I think, in the article, that it's not necessarily the heat that's the problem. It's just, I think, more of a coaching and a tactical thing here in Australia. And we've spoken about this, it feels like forever on this podcast, and we're always talking about how slow the league is to adapt to modern footballing trends tactically and systematically when it comes to setting teams up and how to play football and things like that. And that actually itself is a little bit of a problem when players do move over to Europe, and it's different. The way they play is different. And he actually kind of mentions that a little bit, where he's talking about, there's almost a schism in the coaching ranks in terms of grassroots development, and, people are going it alone independently of the footballing associations and clubs and starting up their own academies and things because, well, you can make more money doing that, right? And as we know, everybody just wants more money. So, of course, you're going to take the option that makes you more money, but it means that not everybody's aligned on the way to actually, train these kids and what's best going to set them up for future success. Some of these coaches don't really care about these kids' future success. They care about the success now because that's going to make them money. But who cares about 10 years' time, right? They're not their coach anymore, right? They'll be playing for a senior club. So I think he kind of gets to one of what I think is one of the root causes here, which is a poor kind of coaching framework in this country, and there's so many divided opinions on how players should be coached and things like that. And look, obviously I'm from Adelaide. We've seen a lot of, I think, very good development over the years in terms of trying to limit that problem in particular from occurring. When Josip Gombau came in to Adelaide United and really started to kind of put in that blueprint of that tiki-taka style that was the thing that was going around world football at the time, with the dominance that Spain had at the Euros and the World Cup. And he brought that to Adelaide, and immediately started going, how do we get the kids playing that? Because it's all well and good to get the current team playing that way, but what about in 5 years' time when they're moving on, or they've retired, or, you know, maybe they're not quite up to it anymore? What are how are we going to actually be able to bring those youngsters through? And so he started to do, you know, things to, you know, he set up the Adelaide United Football School, which I think kind of still continues to this day in what's called, I think it's called the development program, which is a community outreach thing, but it's, you know, based in the footballing philosophy of the club. So you're kind of learning how to play the Adelaide United way. And it's things like that. And, you know, Football SA have done a good job in terms of their coaching education and stuff like that. And it's kind of bringing things a little bit more together. And sure, there's independent coaching academies, but even then, it's Adelaide United themselves have outreach with those. With, you know, it was Marcelo Caruska. He now fronts that development program for Adelaide United, but even former players like Cassio, he had an academy here for a while. I think he might be based in Melbourne now with his sons, but they've done a good job here, and we're kind of seeing the results of that, right, with the young players and the young talent that are coming through at Adelaide United. So I think there is scope to perhaps do it at a national level, and I know that there's kind of been attempts to do that in the past, of trying to unify this idea and this, you know, the curriculum of football, right, across the country, and bring everybody onto the same page. And it's going to be difficult and it's going to be hard, but I think that's one of the key reasons, is that there's so many different, you know, ideas of how to get kids playing the sport and what way you want them to play. And if it's, you know, if you leave it as is, you're getting what you're getting now. And I think I'm going to keep going here, but interrupt me if it's going on too long. But the other thing as well is this idea of our Australian players aren't pressing too much. And yes, there's a tactical element to it. Yes, the heat plays into that as well. But you don't hear that complaint about players coming from other hot countries, from South American countries, from African countries. They don't go, that's not a criticism. They don't go, oh, they don't press enough. It's a criticism of Australian players. I think that's because of the systems they're playing and the tactics that they're playing. The A-League is an incredibly transitional league, we know that. And when you press really high up the pitch, you're leaving yourself open behind for those transitional moments where you're going to get punished. We saw it with Sydney FC. We saw it when Perth tried it, right? It's a big problem being a high-pressing team in this league, because it's so transitional. Because, again, you go back to that grassroots coaching, you're encouraging things like speed and strength and directness and being aggressive in attack. That's going to then, when your players are coming up through the system, they're going to look to keep playing that way, and it's going to lead to more transitional football, more direct football, which is the antithesis to playing really, really, really high press. So it's, I think that he does kind of get to the point, but almost overlooks it in favour of this suggestion that, you know, perhaps changing it to the cooler months of the year will mean that clubs are more likely to press high. I don't think so. I think that they're still going to look to use the qualities of the players they have, which is usually highly transitional, fast attacking players.
So what I think you've hit on is the truth that there is never any one thing, right? There are multiple things. I know there's I'm going to get the acronym wrong, CIES, something like that, observation. They do all these stats on like transfer figures in football. It's usually, whenever you see like an A-League's list of the highest value players in the league at the moment, it's this observatory that pulls up these numbers. And they've done studies on what puts together the value of a player. And there's like 13 different factors or something like that, right? It's never just the one thing. And I think sometimes when we talk about these issues, one trap we fall into as a general Australian footballing public is that we keep things so broad and we speak in such vagaries sometimes that we're never actually offering solutions about the specific issues that we want. And if it's too big, then what's the next step? Like, you know, what's the first step towards solving these issues? So everything you said there, I think there's a lot of truth to. What I want to do specifically in this podcast is really drill down on the timing of the season, when the A-League is played, and the positive and negatives of adjusting that season. So to loop back to Adam's piece, as I said, his thesis is about particularly playing in summer and then hopefully the shift to winter, slightly adjusts the way that the teams perform, and then you have that intensity and speed and pressing efforts, and you know, you can argue it may potentially a different day about whether that would actually change or not, but that's his opinion. And then the solution he offers, and I want to be actually really specific about this. So in his world, his view is that the A-League would have a December, January off-season, and then the league would start in February. So it is going into that kind of calendar year stretch. So February to May would be kind of part one of the A-League season. There would then be a winter break from June and July, and that would essentially, when a World Cup's on, the league breaks through that. There's obviously major sporting events, like major, Euros or whatever going on as well.
Yeah.
Women's World Cups, all that. So a little bit of a break in the A-League season to pause for that. And then obviously you have the state leagues as well that could be championed during that time, and you start the Australia Cup kind of in the back end of that break as well. And then you finish the A-League season in kind of part two from August all the way through to the last weekend of November, where there'd be a grand final. And then you have a December, January off season, as I say, and you come back for the new season in February. So I think if we go back to the thesis and say, the pure football product, even if it's over the course of a season, if you literally took out the 2 months that we play in like January, December, and you plug it into the cooler months, I think you can make a direct comparison and say, to what scale, sure, whatever, but at least a little bit, it's going to increase the quality of the football. That would be my opinion at least. So then when you get to that, you can say, okay, how can we shift the season around maybe not playing in the summer months as much? And to me, the main concern that I have with Adam's proposal is that connection with the global football economy. So you mentioned Japan off the top. The MLS is another one as well. Like Japan have big goals for what they want to do in terms of their status as a league in world football. They want to be right on par and kind of break the illusion that the top 5 leagues have to be from Europe, right? That's how high they're setting their goals. And the MLS, I reckon, are probably aiming even higher than that. For those two massive leagues to really cite the idea that they have to be in sync with those big leagues and the markets that they're buying and selling players to and from, that you end your season at the same time. Obviously, you have 2 windows, but majority of the money is spent in that European summer. So they've deliberately done this big decision to shift their seasons in tune with the European calendar, specifically to allow for more commercial opportunity for buying and selling players. So initially, that's one concern for me, Jacob, and then the other is the interaction with the AFC as well. So 5 or 6 years ago, you can make the opposite argument because the AFC ran their club competitions through just a regular calendar year. But now they've gone to sync themselves as well with the European calendar going over New Year's and Christmas into the new year. So they're my primary 2 concerns as I see it.
Yeah, and the other thing as well is like, if you're part of the argument that Adam Peacock makes is that, if you change it, it's going to increase the level of football, and then players are going to be worth more money when the time comes for them to leave, and clubs are going to get better transfer fees and things. But then, if you're not aligned properly with the global football economy anyway, it's going to be more difficult to find that value for your own players in the market. And that's literally, like you said, one of the big reasons for Japan doing so is that they recognize that the summer window, even the January window in recent years in Europe, has become more and more important for clubs at both ends of leagues, right? Relegation and kind of pushing for titles and for places in Europe and things like that, to go out there and get those last minute players that they think are going to come in and really help their team, either stave off relegation or make a European spot or win some silverware. So they've kind of, recognized that there's a massive opportunity there monetarily to actually have their players kind of in the shop window. But like you said, their grand aspirations at the end of the day are to be a big league that rivals those European leagues. And so it's also that opportunity for those clubs to have those windows during their season to also then be able to bring players in. So, that's where it is slightly different with Australia, where I think anybody who has an idea of an Australian Football League rivaling European leagues within the next 50 years, probably suffering delusions of grandeur, to be honest. We'd all love it, right? It would be fantastic if that was to happen, but I think that is a highly unlikely scenario. So you're only losing one half of the transfer alignment type thing, which is the outgoings, right? The incomings have never really been a big deal for the clubs in the A-League. They'll make do with what they can get anyway. It might help promote actually some youth development and things like that as well. But yeah, I do agree that is a slight concern, because if you're wanting to get value out of players, you've got to have yourself lined up nicely. It's a problem we see actually in women's football. I don't know if it's still a really prevalent thing, but for a while it was, where some of them would go and play in like some of the Scandinavian leagues and things like that in, different weird breaks during the season for, short 6-month contracts or whatever. And, just to keep themselves playing football.
Well, the US was the big one. They used to play in the US and then come back for the A-League. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's like, there's kind of proof that it can almost work on an incoming level, but yeah, I just think that you risk kind of alienating yourself even more than just being a million miles away from everyone else by not having it quite aligned.
And another thing that's actually just popped into my head, but because we operate in the cap system, a lot of our planning has to be done at the start of the year.
Yeah.
Great example. We've seen Zach Clough go to the Jets, and the rumour is because the Adelaide United don't have any visa spots. And then, of course, a couple of weeks later, they get rid of Feitel, but that illustrates the problem, right? Is that you set your squads up at the start of the year, and then you only have limited room to navigate in the middle of the season. So because Australian clubs at the moment don't have the financial capacity to, say, buy Australians from overseas as well, it's all off-contract deals. Australians become free agents, and then A-League clubs are fighting for them to sign a contract. It's not them often, buying a player out of their contract that exists. Yeah. So if all of a sudden all these Australians are coming out of contract halfway through an A-League season, and the spots are so limited because you've already done your pre-season, your squad planning at the start of the year, then that's going to really limit the opportunity for Australians to come back and play in the A-League as well.
I hadn't even thought of that, because that was that's a really good point. Because that was always something fascinating in this kind of January transfer window for Australian clubs was, and you mentioned the relationship with Asian leagues, was when those Asian leagues would be kind of out of alignment, right, and finish up in December. A lot of the players would be off contract December 31st. All of a sudden, the A-League transfer window's in a week or so after that, and a lot of these players from Asia are suddenly available. Some of them Australians. I know in years past I've been crying for an A-League team to sign Harrison Delbridge. I think it was 2 seasons ago he was off contract, and I was like, you'd be crazy not to do it. Somebody do it. And then they didn't, and now obviously City have done. But it's that's a good point. Yeah, it would be the inverse way round if you were to flip the calendar for Australia, where it's the A-League clubs are losing these players and not necessarily able to bring them in. Yeah, that's a good point. I hadn't thought of that.
I think a couple of other reasons why a shift to this calendar might actually be a good idea as well, because we want to take both sides of this argument, is 2 of the fundamental reasons why the Australian Soccer Federation moved in the first place feel like they've waned away in the world that we currently live in. So ground availability and quality being one. Australia football has a ground and stadium availability issue regardless of what season that they were playing in. I know Adam goes through it in terms of on the piece as well in terms of the specific stadiums, but it's really not all that different. Footballers will be able to speak better to the quality of the pitch, especially going in and forth with the NRL and different other codes as well. But
well, actually, I can offer a little bit of insight on that. Interestingly, my boss used to work for like the SCG and that that whole stadium trust thing, and they obviously own Sydney Football Stadium as well. And he was talking about how the groundskeepers always hated when there was overlap between the A-League and NRL seasons, because the players and teams and coaches want the grass cut at different lengths. And if you have games on the same weekend, that's not possible to do, right? The grass has to be one length. So it's either in between, in which case it doesn't really help anybody, or it's, one extreme or the other, where it's slightly longer in rugby league and shorter in football. And then you've got one team and one group of players and one set of coaches that are complaining. So, that's an interesting little tidbit.
Yeah, and it obviously is annoying, right? But we have some overlap anyway.
Yeah.
I think we all know that for the long-term future of Australian football, we need clubs owning their own stadiums so they can make those decisions themselves. That then is not affected at all by what time of the year that you're playing in. And then the other issue is free air in terms of a media sense. And as I said off the top, there was a large boost in the NSL when they made this change and having more people turning up to games. But as we know, the current state of the A-League, the crowd issues have nothing to do with the competition. It's around the perception of the league themselves. and there is little to no mainstream media interest apart from the host broadcaster. So that going to winter wouldn't even change either, to be honest.
No. And then you've got to factor in, okay, sure, you're getting rid of some of those really hot, sweltery days that people don't want to go out in, but then you're replacing it with freezing cold, rainy, stormy days that people don't want to go out in. So it's even the weather isn't going to actually really affect things all that much. Yeah, like you said, I think the crowd issues are very much separate to it being in summer. And actually, I kind of, at least from what I've seen, obviously on social media, it's not the best representation of how people and the fan base of football in this country feel as a whole. But a lot of people love the A-League being in summer because it's got a kind of summer vibe about it, right? Where it's good fun, you know, you're out in the sun with your mates, you know, it's just a good experience. You've got, you know, places like Gosford are designed for this to be a summer competition. Like, could you imagine how depressing and drab that would be in winter? It wouldn't be the same kind of feeling, you know. And it's also in summer, I don't know, people just are happier, right? Like it's seasonal depression's a thing. And I don't know, I see a lot of people saying, no, it's kind of cool having it, you know, as a summer thing. We're in Australia, it's going to be warm. Let's embrace it. Let's have some fun with it and, you know, have it. Sure, it's the hottest time of the year, but you get some great scenes. It's sunny. You know, you actually want to be outside for most of it.
Mm. So if you then take away those initial arguments why the NSL moved to the summer in the first place, well, then almost you think, okay, go back to the default. Football is a winter sport. You got to have a good reason to move it to the summer. Right. And I think we do have some good reasons in terms of that alignment with Europe, and, you know, it is established in the summer now. But I think the biggest argument of all as to why the A-League should go to winter is the connection to all the tiers
domestic
below it.
Yeah.
So the golden goose, Jacob, of this debate is a proper football pyramid with promotion and relegation between the leagues possible if the Australian Championship or Home and Away League or the grassroots football, whatever, is played through the winter and the A-League is played through the summer? Is that possible? Because if it's not, then what are we doing here? The debate ends immediately. Yeah,
well, then do you flip the question and go, do you move the Championship and the NPL?
I don't think you can, because the grassroots game is always going to be embedded in the winter in terms of kids growing up and playing the game. That end of the pyramid is always going to be winter. I don't think you can move that across.
Yeah, that is very tricky, and it's possible, but I don't think it would be ideal, because you'd have a team or two teams or whatever the eventuality of there being promotion and relegation is, kind of just sitting around for a while, right? Because you're not expecting them to play the second division, win that, and then 3 weeks later go and start an A-League campaign, right? That's a bit rough on them. But you don't want them to then just sit around for the whole summer not doing anything, and then have to sit through the whole winter not doing anything, and then come back the next season. So there's alignment with the outside world and alignment domestically, and it's which one do you want and which one is going to be better for the game overall and the future of the game here. And I know a lot of people are going to say domestically, right? Because then you have that opportunity to have a proper footballing pyramid, and you can have promotion and relegation, and you can kind of establish yourself as a proper footballing system. But is that going to be best? Is that the best thing for the game in this country, to have promotion and relegation? Is that the number one thing? And I know it's a topic that people love to talk about, and we've spoken about it on this podcast a lot. Is that the single most pressing issue that football is facing in this country, is that there is no pyramid structure to it, that there's no promotion and relegation, and there's not really any prospects of that happening anytime soon? Is that the biggest thing? If so, then yes, absolutely spot on. What are we talking about here? We have to move it back to winter. But if that's not the number one most pressing issue, and if it's going to cause more problems than it's going to solve, then what are we talking about? Let's keep it in summer.
Yeah, so I wouldn't describe it as the most pressing issue, but I would describe it as the most important long-term goal for the future of Australian football. Now, in my head, that does not necessarily mean straight away, okay, then the A-League has to move to winter. Let me take you through what I would do. And this is based off a couple of hours of, thinking about it and crafting it in my head and writing it down on my little pad of paper here, right? I'm sure there's going to be ways you can optimize this, but this is what I would do. In my head, you have the winter pyramid. Like, one thing we often forget about as well, that is Australia has a very deep football pyramid. Yeah. It's just that the A-League isn't connected to it right at the top. So I would have your winter pyramid and your NPL competitions in your state. And then you have, starts in February, goes to kind of September time. And then you have your NPL finals in the current format of the Australian Championship. You probably have some groups and then a knockout phase as well. And then the winners of those NPL finals then qualify for the Australia. So they promote essentially into the Australian Championship. And the Australian Championship would be like February through November or something like that winter season. So you're actually having like a pyramid of football for Australia that is in winter. And then this is very similar to a kind of idea that some A-League people threw around a little while ago, is that you're kind of expanding the A-League and then you're creating an A-League 2, maybe even an A-League 3 by the time you promote or you create enough licenses in the A-League structure. And that goes from August all the way through May. So you're extending the season and you're going essentially the normal timeline of a European competition. However, what I would do to solve the problem of playing in extreme temperatures is actually have the summer break. And I know that we've talked about this on the podcast a little bit in the last month as well. The more I think about it, the more I warm to it. The whole free air thing, as much as the media doesn't matter so much, it does help when you're not competing with people showing up. Because people have to make a choice between what events they go to, especially in the cost of living crisis that we're living through. There's only so much money you can spend on these kind of activities. So I would, maybe you take a bit of December off, maybe you take a bit of February off, but definitely January. I think the whole month of January, you just write off and you say, we're pausing. We're not playing through the hottest month of the year. We're not playing through the Big Bash finals, which, there's lots of news around privatisation in the Big Bash and what that might look like for its success. You're not playing through the Australian Open either, and that kind of cuts through your big cricket and tennis kind of summer month as well. And this is not unusual as well. A lot of clubs in Europe, the Bundesliga, have 3-4 weeks off. France and La Liga, I think, maybe only have a week, but Austria go off for ages. There's a bunch of other leagues that have big pauses around this time of year for their weather concerns.
Yeah.
And Japan is going to have one as well. They're going to have a winter break because it gets so cold, right? So I would have the summer break in the A-League. And then the tricky question is, how do you promote between, say, A-League 2, just in the next kind of 10 years, is that bottom league in the summer, to the Australian Championship, which is the top team in the winter. And this is absolutely a quirk and it makes it tough. But I think what people have to think about is the quirk in the promotion and relegation worth all the benefits that we talked about having the A-League in the summer in terms of aligning with Asia, aligning with the rest of the world for transfers and keeping that summer A-League? What I would do, this is a first idea, please tell me if you think this is stupid, but whoever gets relegated from the A-League 2 and whoever wins the Australian Championship, say the Australian Championship finishes in November and you have, just for ease of example, you have one team that wins the Australian Championship, promotes up to the A-League 2. They play the first half of the next Australian Championship season. So they're playing competitive football. It won't be for points because they're not going to win anything at the end of the season, but they are participating in that league for the first half. You get to your halfway point. Everyone's played them once, and then they substitute out with the team that's just been relegated from the A-League. So the midpoint is, say, July. Someone has been relegated from the A-League 2 in May. So they have a month and a half, 2 months off. Then they drop down and they play one fixture against everyone in the Australian Championship as well. And maybe you set them to half or the average amount of points. So they can still qualify for finals and play finals. They're not going to be promoted straight away. You have to play a whole season for that. But then the team that jumps out of the Australian Championship at the halfway point then has a month or so until the A-League 2 season starts. That's a very rough idea at how the kind of quirky promotion and relegation could work. And then the question you have to ask yourself is, having that kind of weird sub in and out season, is that worth all the benefits of playing the A-League in summer?
It's like having a mid-year start in reception, right? Having one of those classes that comes in halfway through the year and it's, they're then out of alignment and they're slightly older or slightly younger than everyone else around them. Look, I don't think there is an ideal solution. I'll put it out there straight away. I don't think there's a perfect answer for any of this, which is why it's kind of fun, right? Because you can come up with anything and justify it, and you can go, yeah, I mean, it's theoretically could work as well as any other suggestion that's being made. It kind of reminds me slightly of the Brazilian football system in a way. It's different, but kind of similar in Brazil. And I'm not going to profess to be some expert on the Brazilian football system, but they have a national setup and a state setup. But the teams play in both of those setups. So there's pyramids at the state level, which is what we've got with the MPL system in each state. And there's a national pyramid as well, and clubs can compete in both of those systems and reach the top in both of those. Obviously the national system is considered, kind of the elite and the premier, and teams that are at the top there are the best in the country, but then they also go and play in the state competitions as well. And it's kind of similar in a way, in that there's teams jumping around between competitions. They're playing in both competitions at the same time, though, which is where it's different to your idea, Lachie, where you kind of jump in halfway through the season and play out half a season, and then you're not playing A-League football, you're playing in the Championship, or you are playing A-League football, not the Championship. But I thought it's not like this is an unheard of thing where there's almost kind of split systems. And then in terms of splitting leagues, that's been done for years in Belgium at the very least. They've got a very crazy league system over there where they split the table in halfway through the season, and then they half the number of points everybody's on or something, and then the bottom half play against each other and the top half play against each other. Again, I'm no expert on it, but there is again, there's precedent for kind of stopping and reevaluating where you're at and which teams belong where, kind of thing. I just don't know. Is it too complicated to just look, it's Australian sports, you have a league phase and then you play your finals, and it's that's how you do it. That's how it works. If you've got all this nonsense of teams jumping around, you've got a national...
It's just a transfer window. Instead of transferring players, you're transferring teams between the leagues.
which again, you can justify it, and you can go, yeah, it would kind of work, because then these teams that are moving aren't having these massive gaps and they're still playing football. But then it's, okay, you're saying you give one team or two teams or however many it is that are falling down to the Championship, they only play for half points. And then it's but then also, how do we work the transfer windows for these competitions as well? Because unless the APL and the FA decide to have different transfer windows so that teams that are moving between these competitions have the opportunity to sign and cut players and you
still have your normal your January and then your June July kind of window. They still stand, and they work on the two off seasons of the different
I guess it's
structures.
It just feels like it would still be a little bit of a rush for some of those clubs to kind
potentially. And look, it's just one option.
Yeah.
And look, I'll be the first to admit that moving teams around in leagues mid-season is very complicated. But the thing I go back to is we're in a very unique part of the world. Australia is not in Asia yet. We're in Asia. Australia is not in Oceania yet. We are in Oceania. South Melbourne are playing in the Pro League. We play in AFC competitions. Auckland United can play in both confederations, yet they can only play in one pathway to the World Cup. There are so many exceptions in this part of the world because of the uniqueness of our scenarios. I think we just have to take things back to first principles, evaluate the pros and cons of every option. And there are a lot of cons with my option as well, I'll admit that. And just see what works best. And I don't know. I don't know if you have a better idea for me in terms of how you would manage the seasons, but bottom line for me is that I want the A-League in summer, and then it has to be promotion and relegation. So to try and find one way to kind of mix those two things together is kind of what I'm looking for.
Yeah, I don't have a brilliant solution, to be honest. And I do think there is something maybe in that Brazilian idea of having state and national, but they're conjoined still, despite being separate pyramids. But that would require the FA and the APL to work together to kind of establish that. And I feel like that would be... theoretically, this is still...
like a vertical pyramid in terms of promotion relegation until you get down to the regional MPLs, which every country in the world eventually goes regional, right?
Yeah.
And splits them up. It's just the fact that we have to move between
it's the timings
seasons
of
that
them
makes it awkward.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know. Do we create a
You,
new...
like you said, you don't want them sitting around for 9 months right, and not playing.
That's why I said as well, I don't think there's a perfect solution. Because I think at all stages, you're also going to bump across, is it all just too much work? That's the other con that we haven't touched on, is sure, there might be all these pros down the road, but is it just too much work to even bother with in the first place? You know, with some of these, I think with something like transferring clubs mid-season between competitions, and you know, I think that is not just initially an absolute logistic nightmare. I think it's an ongoing one that is gonna, because all of a sudden now you've got to find the money. Clubs already struggling financially. Now you've got to find the money to also do more travel, but to clubs that maybe necessarily weren't in your plans and that might be in slightly more difficult, you know, kind of areas to reach traditionally. And, you know, then you've got, I don't know. It feels like all this discussion is great because, you know, there are problems with it being played in summer. There are, you know, great reasons to move it to winter. And for, you know, like you said, this big picture thinking, you can see what it could lay out for the future of the game. But it feels like it's just too much, Lachie. I don't know. Maybe I'm being too pessimistic.
We can't have that attitude. It's never too much. We've got to work towards these things. But it just feels
like too much work. It's never going to be perfect, regardless of what happens. So why bother? Why bother? Like,
because we have to bother, Jacob. We have to. If we want the game to improve, we have to bother. That's the whole crux. That's the big picture, meta level conversation of all of this, is that we have to bother.
Yeah. I don't know. Just keep it as is, and just, I don't know. I think look, promotion and relegation is. We'll just kick the can down the road. We've been doing it for 20 years. We'll keep doing it for another.
But we got to stop that attitude. We got to stop that attitude of kicking it down the road. We got to take action.
We got to make sure that the top level of the game is stable in the first place, Lachie, as well. That's the other thing. That's true.
There is a big way to go.
That's still a very pressing issue for the game at the moment. Is that we don't actually know year to year that it is there's going to be this big national competition. So, you know, I think there might be bigger fish to fry at the moment.
For sure, but also having an idea of where we want to be allows us to create the intervals and the steps that build towards that as well, which is a key point. Okay,
and so then counterpoint thinking, devil's advocate, because I think promotion relegation is great. It should be the standard for sporting leagues. I think around the globe should have some form of punishment for teams not doing well, and a reward for smaller teams doing very well. But is, like, you know, I said before, is promotion relegation the number one most pressing thing? Do we need it? Like, in terms of maybe it's not all that it's kind of talked up to be, right? And that, you know, sure, okay, England has it, right? But football has been being played in England at this kind of, you know, established, organized level since the late 19th century, right? Like, it's comparatively much more recent game here, right? Sure, it's been played for a long time, but it's really post-war with European immigration that it became kind of what it is now, and it's professionalized and things. And that's why Australian rules football has taken the foreground of being, you know, the football code for this country, is because, well, that's what was established before association football kind of became good. Anyway, going on a tangent here, but just because it works in these countries that have over 100+ years of history of this sport, does it mean that it's going to work in the same way for a country where the sport is much more recent? You know, so, I know America are trying to do it, right?
Yep.
Or at least, you know, are thinking about it. But the USL Championship itself is in a very strong place. They get great crowd numbers. They play good football, really strong teams with great support. And a lot of people there are saying, if we're suddenly having promotion and relegation between the Championship and the MLS, it's great because, you know, again, you're rewarding clubs for doing well. You're punishing MLS teams who aren't doing all that great. But there's a complete disparity between, realistically, the levels of these teams. Like, you know, it's less so here, where the A-League and the NPL level, we kind of saw with the Championship the successes that it had, that gap is significantly closing. But I still think that, maybe it just wouldn't work regardless, right? Maybe it's just, we just don't, like, promotion and relegation just isn't a thing that Australian football needs. I don't know.
Look, what you said about just because it works in England, does that mean that it works in Australia? I 100% agree with, because of the uniqueness, again, of where we are in the world and a situation with other sporting codes and the sporting nation that is Australia and the different dynamics there. We have to find solutions that are unique to us that work for us. That being said, I think promotion and relegation is one of those solutions, and then we have to get there somehow. But big picture, and just to wrap this all up, as I said, the top line of this whole discussion is that we need to be talking about these things more as a football community, and not just, you said this, I hate it, this is the wrong option, I don't want to do it because you said so. We actually need
I wasn't listening to a thing you said the last 45 minutes, Lachie.
Setting great examples. But we need to be talking about this, and we need Adam Peacock on Football 360 throwing out bold ideas like that. We need, we're going to do our best with this podcast to pick up these ideas and have further discussions about it. We want to know what you think. So get in the comments of the YouTube video or the podcast and let us know what you would do. For what it's worth, maybe instead of doing the mid-season switch, if you get relegated from the A-League, you just send your players down. I'm sure there'd be clauses in terms of releasing if you get relegated out of A-League 2. Anyone else that stays around can just join the under-23s that are playing in your state leagues anyway, or a B team, reserve team, something like that. I'd throw in a League Cup as well. What do you think? What do you think would be best for the league? Give us the reasons why, and let's evaluate the ideas, because that's what we're here for. And that's good. That took up 45 minutes of this podcast. I knew that was going to be.
We could have gone for longer as well, I think. I think there's a lot of meat to that discussion.
There absolutely is. But for the rest of the podcast today, there is some elite transfer news. One that just dropped right off on our doorstep before we hit record, Jacob, is that the Wellington Phoenix are going to make a major announcement 15 minutes before the game on Friday afternoon or evening for them. So if you're listening before that game happens, the rumour is, and this has been reported by Andrew Vorman from stuff.com, is that Sarpreet Singh is back at the Wellington Phoenix. He lit the A-League alight when he was coming through as a youngster, got the big transfer to Bayern Munich. He was Nesteri Irankunda before Nesteri Irankunda hit the deck. Obviously, it didn't work out. He's bounced around between a few different leagues in Europe, but he's only 26 years old. I'm sure he has his sights set on the New Zealand World Cup squad in a couple of months' time. He is back to where it all began at the Wellington Phoenix, Jacob, and I think that's quite exciting.
That's a great signing for Wellington. Okay, sure, he's not hit the highs that he had at Wellington over in Europe, but, we also have to remember he was one of those players that, he's suffered from injuries as well throughout his career, which is an ongoing problem for Australian players heading overseas. But, you actually look at it. He's been playing football. I made a perhaps slightly offhand comment that, he's just been on the bench the whole time, but he's not. He's getting minutes. He's playing games. He's played 15 games this season in Serbia, in the Serbian Super League. He's played in the Bundesliga 2 for clubs like, Hansa Rostock, Nuremberg, and he's getting game time there, scoring goals, creating chances. He's sure it's not been, his name hasn't been up in lights, but I think, there's kind of a couple of reasons for that. And number one is, he's not doing it for Bayern Munich, which is what everybody kind of hoped that he would do. Number two, he is, at the end of the day, a Kiwi. And when a lot of the football media that we kind of consume, especially around the A-League, is focused heavily on Australian players and Australian teams. And sure, the Phoenix and Auckland, they get the coverage, but it's not quite to that same extent. And so if you're not necessarily in those circles, you won't have heard as much about him, right? He's doing a decent job for himself, and now to come back to Wellington, it's kind of in the vein of some of those Socceroos players that have signed for the likes of City, right? Where they're maybe doing okay in Europe, but this is their chance to come back and do really, really well in front of the eyes of the people that are going to be making the decisions for the World Cup that's coming up, in terms of who's going, to actually be in the squad, who's going to be the ones making an impact, who's going to be playing minutes. So it just seems like it's another one of these ones where we've been the beneficiaries of having the World Cup when it is, and it lining up nicely with this January transfer window. We didn't even touch on that nation, Lachie, with the the benefit of World Cup years and things. But yeah, it's Wellington get a quality attacking player, which I think there's been a lot of criticism over their high line and how they've conceded goals. But I think the bigger problem is they can't put the ball in the back of the net a lot of the time. So they're suddenly getting a real creative force in Sarpreet Singh. He's getting a chance to come back to Wellington, play at still a very good level, a level that he knows he can do really well in, and that is going to be an opportunity, like I said, to perform in front of the New Zealand footballing community ahead of the World Cup in the hopes of making the squad. It just seems like, for all parties involved, it seems like it's a pretty perfect deal.
Yeah, absolutely. So another rumour that's been going around, Jacob Farrell coming back to the A-League. We heard a little while ago, towards the back end of 2025, that he was potentially going to come back to the Mariners, and then when the whole ownership thing happened, that deal fell through. There's been some suggestions maybe Melbourne Victory were looking into him as well. The hard news reported by Marco Monteverde on Thursday is that today, Thursday, he was scheduled for a medical at the Western Sydney Wanderers. So if that all goes well, potentially has gone well by the time of recording, the Wanderers look to be locking up Jacob Farrell. Some other international news, Mo Toure has made a switch from Denmark over to the English Championship with Norwich, which is pretty cool. $5 million Australian, which is,
and I'd
nice
imagine, I'm surely, Adelaide, please tell me you had some form of sell-on clause,
some kick on,
percent. Even if it's a small percentage, this is a big enough fee that even a tiny percentage is going to be a nice little chunk of change. And I will say that's something they have done well, is capitalize on selling these players for good money. So I'd like to think they had something in there that down the line, when he's sold for big bucks to an English club, we're getting some of that,
100%. And you'd have to say, if he goes and does well for Norwich in this back end of the championship season, what other Australian striker is at that level?
How many Australians are playing in the championship now? Is it like
there's heaps?
Like
there's
10
so many
now. It feels like it's every team basically has an Australian playing for them.
Maybe less with some of the loans that have gone through, but
that's true actually.
Still heaps, which is awesome. Reece Bozanovsky has gone off to Heracles, so we heard earlier maybe Kikianis, that deal is not going to happen this window, potentially at the end of the year. But Reece Bozanovsky, they've paid his release clause, which I think was rumoured around 450,000 Australian bucks. So in the words of dear friend Antonis, Ernest Faber came to Australia, made a shopping list, and then went back to the Netherlands. So he's picked up
that's a bargain for Bozanovsky as well, by the way. I don't know if maybe that was just, his kind of the circumstances of being part of that Western United ordeal, and just, if I'm going to sign, I'm going to have a low release clause kind of thing. But that's rough. That's rough for the club, because he's a very, very quality player that could realistically go for more than that. So
he definitely could have gone for more than that, but also you've snapped him up as a free agent, played him for like 8 games, and now you're getting $500,000.
Yeah, that's true. It's not bad.
Not bad at all. Another rumour going around, Akol Akon, of course, 16-year-old, made a big name for himself in the derby, apparently getting interest from Premier League and Bundesliga clubs in the last week or so.
This is the thing as well. Like, 10 years ago, this wouldn't have happened. You have one good game, you're not talking, there's not talks about, sure, okay, they're probably highly unsubstantiated rumours, and there aren't actually Premier Leagues looking at him seriously as a senior player, but 10 years ago, even these sort of rumours wouldn't have happened for a player having, made an impact in one of their first games as a youngster. So I think it's just like, it shows there's good progression, and that people are starting to actually kind of invest mentally in what Australian football can be. It's not just, out in the middle of nowhere and they kind of just play it for fun. It's actually, they produce good players, they take it seriously. There's an opportunity now for Australia to be like the new Brazil or the new Uruguay or the new Argentina or whatever, where it's like the players are relatively cheap compared to getting them from European countries. South America now, they've pushed their prices up. Australia is starting to do that. So I feel like, it's becoming this opportunity for young players to get this attention, an opportunity for clubs to make a bit of money, and for the world to start to take the Australian footballing kind of ecosystem a little bit more seriously.
Yeah, another slight on the Wanderers as well, by the way, letting him go. Sydney snapped him up.
They cannot catch a break with that, by the way. Like, that just feels like every season we're talking about some great former kind of Wanderers youth player or whatever that's gone on to another club and is actually doing really well there. And it's just, yeah, it just feels like every year there's a little bit of a kick in the chest in that regard.
And so he's on a 3-year deal. He obviously won't turn 18 for another season and a half. So I believe he's Australian with South Sudanese heritage. I'm not sure if he has a European passport or not through some other connection. But if that isn't the case, then he'd have to wait till he's 18. So at least he'd still have a year in his contract if that came true. So hopefully Sydney FC gets some good money for him. Someone who won't get money for a transfer is the Newcastle Jets. The final little rumour that we've gone through today is Bodo Glimt, who the Scandinavian team that just beat Manchester City and Atletico Madrid in the Champions League to qualify for the knockout stage. Their technical team, according to James Dodd, who spoke on Total A-Leagues on Thursday, has been in Australia, and one player that they particularly adored with is Mark Natter. And the quote that Dodd had is that the technical team believe that technically Natter could just walk into the team at Bodo Glimt, which is quite high praise. And Daniel McBreen had some stuff to say on the show about, some of the areas he has to improve as well, which all players do. But that's very high praise. And you talk about, mentally investing in the A-League. All of a sudden you have a team like Bodo Glimt trying to pick players, and they are a team, like they're a powerhouse of their nation in Norway, and they could legitimately kind of, be that jump for A-League players, throw A-League players into the team. And because they're the Giant, they're playing in the Champions League. Like that, that's such a cool link.
They're playing in the Champions League. The problem is, Lachie, they, I'm pretty sure, are above the Arctic Circle. It's freezing cold there all the time. You want to talk about, even moving the season to winter here wouldn't help that. It's still 20 degrees too hot in the winter here for what it's like in the summer over there. Like, it is properly cold. And that's actually kind of almost a superpower for them, and why they have been so strong is because even against like other Scandinavian teams, I think they're in Norway, against other Norwegian teams, it's so cold there. It's unbelievable. And that's why it's, in the Europa League, in the Champions League, whatever, teams hate going there because there's nothing you can do to prepare for the warm here. There's nothing you can do to prepare to be that cold. It's just, sure, you're running around so you warm up, but when you're that cold to start with, there's no amount of, exercise you can do that is actually going to like meaningfully warm you up. So yeah, he might have the talent and the technique, and obviously, Will is a big fan of his and has been for a while now. You called him, was it you that called him the Oracle in the group chat earlier?
Yeah.
But
he's got receipts.
Yeah, that's right, he does. But yeah, I think regardless of how good a player you are, that is going to be one hell of a culture shock to move to arguably the coldest football club in the world. But if it's true, I mean, great on him, because yeah, he is talented. This one really hurts for the Jets, like you said, because he's off contract. There's not going to be... Would they even get a training fee for him?
He's been there for 4 years. There might be some form of compensation. I'm not sure how old he is.
Nowhere near amount, to his actual value as a player. So that's rough. And again, I think it goes to highlight how important it is that clubs extend and offer longer term contracts for their talented younger players, kind of going, right, they might leave in 2 years. Let's have them for 4 on paper so that we've got some leverage. We've got some negotiating power. We don't have to let them go. We can kind of, sure, they might be unhappy, but if it's not a good, if it's not a good figure, we can let them stay. So it's, I think it kind of highlights that there is still a lot of work for some of these clubs to do to kind of wrap their heads around that. And it's, it's a philosophical change, right? Fundamentally for a lot of clubs where, it feels like for a long time the A-League was almost a different squad every year for a lot of teams, and that's changing now. But there's obviously still work to do, particularly with those younger players, to make sure that their potential is realised, their development is kind of actually able to occur, and then you're able to sell the player with bargaining power when they're kind of starting to really break through, which the Jets unfortunately aren't able to with Natter. I believe you said they did extend him though, it just wasn't for long enough to actually capitalise on this.
2-year deals,
yeah,
which will expire at the end of this year. And Dodd was saying not going to happen this window, maybe at the end of the season. Maybe that's enough time to convince him to sign on for longer. Who knows? We'll see what happens. But that's the end of the transfer news let's finish off the pod with the weekend look, Jacob. We got Phoenix versus Victory, and then the Bulls versus Glory on the Friday. So 2 games on a Friday. I think is it Waitangi Day tomorrow as well in New Zealand, which is why they've got that Phoenix Victory game on as well. And then Auckland Sydney is going to be massive.
That's going to be a great
game. The early game Saturday. Yeah, Raw Mariners, Wanderers versus City, and then the lone game on the Sunday is Adelaide United versus the Newcastle Jets. And for me, the first question: who's it a big weekend for? And I'm going to say Sydney and Auckland. And really this extends 2 weeks as well, because we highlighted this on the predictions game for YouTube members, but they play twice in 11 days. And so a couple of weeks ago, even like before the Jets did this amazing run, you'd think, okay, we literally talked about it. These are the 2 teams that are competing for the premiership. Obviously, the Jets are there now. But, if the Jets fall off, then if either of these 2 teams win the premiership this year, this 11 days is going to define how they do that. So it is a 100%. Massive weekend. Auckland don't play next weekend. They have a bye because they have a schedule against, I don't know who it was, either City or Macarthur. Their Asian fixtures mean that Auckland get a bye. So Sydney are going to have to come off 3 days, 3-day break for the second game that's played midweek, 11 days after this one. So they're going to be looking to get some points here away from home, and Auckland are going to know that they have that advantage of the rest afterwards. So I think it's massive. These 2 games probably could define the premiership if one of these teams.
It feels like a semi-final being played in the middle of the season. 2 legs home and away. A week from one another. It's just the only thing different, of course, is that one of those teams has to then also play a game in between those. So that hurts Sydney, but this is you're spot on. It's massive. Absolutely massive game. Yeah.
And I, if someone gets 6 points here, I think you can rule the line through the other.
The other team's
it's that
done.
Big in terms of premiership, of course. What's who's it a big weekend for you?
Person we just spoke about, Mark Natter. I think with all the attention on him, the talk of him moving overseas, it's justified. He's been a very, very good player for the Jets. But now that that's kind of realised and people are going to take notice of him more, it can be, kind of fight or flight for players, right? Are they able to just go, I don't care about that. I know, that I'm that good, that I can make that move, and I believe in myself, and I'm going to keep playing to the level that I have done? Or do they let that get on top of them, either in a negative or overly positive way, where they get too arrogant and they go, I shouldn't be playing at this level. This club that's playing in the Champions League said that I should be starting for them, but what am I doing with the Jets? Or on the other hand, go, oh geez, am I really that good? And they start to doubt themselves. So I think this could be a huge one for him. He's, they're coming up against Adelaide, which aside from themselves are the best attacking team in the league. So, he might have a bit of defending to do. I think it could be a huge weekend for him, because again, if he does have a not great game, the criticism is going to be tenfold of what a Bodoglim thinking, even, saying that he's good. It's just, it feels like there's a lot of scenarios in which he loses and only very few where he gets, a bit of a win and a boost for his confidence. So it's going to be a massive weekend for him.
Yeah, I reckon you're spot on. In a dream world, Melbourne City and the Macarthur Bulls find some form finally ahead of their big AFC competition games in the following week and a half. So City, after they play the Wanderers, off to South Korea to play Ulsan, which is Wednesday, 9 o'clock kickoff. So by my maths, they're pretty much locked into the knockouts, but 1 point would almost certainly zip it up for good in their remaining 2 games. And of course, we want the coefficient points as well. So big for City to get a result there. So hopefully, look, the Wanderers, theoretically, obviously they're bottom of the league, right? It should be the easiest place to try and gain some form. But it was only a couple of weeks ago they lost to the Bulls 6-2. And then really, honestly, for Macarthur as well, outside of that game, they've been really up and down. So they have a return leg up and back against Bangkok United. So the first leg in Thailand, I think it's an 11:15 kickoff on Thursday evening. After this, so a little bit longer, obviously later in the week being the second tier competition. And then they both have byes until the next leg. So Bulls will come back to play Thailand, Bangkok United in Australia, and then City play another South Korean team. I can't remember who it is. Gangwon maybe.
Gangwon, yeah.
In Melbourne the following week. So hopefully those two teams, Bulls are playing the glory, just get a little bit of form, have some nice performances, and yeah, go into those games with a bit of confidence.
Interesting. Yeah, I've kind of gone a similar route in terms of a team finding some form, and that's Brisbane Roar. Because yeah, I just really, I really want them to do well. I like the approach they've taken this season. When they were on at the start of the season, it wasn't. Look, I don't want this taken out of context. It wasn't fun to watch them at times, right? But it's always good to see a team that just looks at the fundamentals and just goes, we're going to do these things really, really well. And that's what they were doing to start the season. And their kind of form has taken a big hit. What is it? 4 losses in their last 5 games or something. And they're starting to slide down the table. And we've had this discussion on the podcast about the pros and cons of a league being tight and things like that. But if the Raw win, of course, it brings them back up. It makes that fight in and around the 4, 5, 6, even top 3 range kind of, much more interesting for a lot of teams. And, yeah, like I said, there are cons associated with that in terms of, is it actually helping anybody having this kind of really close battle across the league? But from a neutral's perspective, it's incredibly exciting. So I think it would be great to see them kind of get some form back. They've had injury issues, of course. They've had Michael Valkanis went away and the passing of his mother. And, it's been, a bit of a tumultuous period for them. So, the chance to kind of new month, reset, go again, start strong, find that form again and start to claw their way back up the table. It'd be really cool to see.
100%. And then finally, I'm going to play right off the back of you. My worst case scenario is that the Raw lose at home to the Mariners. I think they've just been hanging in there thanks to their really good start to the season. And all of a sudden, if you lose this game at home to the Mariners, again, everyone's a good team. It's hard to get points in this league. The Mariners are one of the softer teams. And they've been going all right recently, so it's not going to be unexpected if they win. But for the Raw, a few red flags, this loss turns into sirens and alarm bells and what is going on here. They've dropped out of the 6 for the first time since either ever or the first couple of rounds. I'm not sure how it shook out, but that would be really bad for the Raw.
Yeah, interesting. Mine's an opposite thing where it's Auckland win. Would be, and that sounds really weird, but this is my thinking behind it. Is, like I said, it feels like a semi-final being played in the middle of the season, but Sydney have an extra game in between. And I think if Auckland win this first one, sure, Sydney are going to want to come back out, on the 17th and, return the favour, but they've got a game in between, which is also going to take something out of them too. And it's going to be much more difficult for them to do it. And Auckland are going to be going in with rest and with confidence. I think it would be much more exciting in that second leg of this fixture if Sydney won or there was a draw in this one where it's kind of a blank slate. Sydney then play against Adelaide and, then it's not going to change their intensity level in that match, but it's going to change the storyline heading into that second fixture. And I think make it a much more interesting one. So that's kind of, it's weird and, convoluted, but I think a team winning could be a bad thing.
Okay. Well, we'll leave you on that then for this episode of the Round Ball Australia podcast. Again, let us know what you think in terms of the whole calendar conversation. What would you do? What do you think of our ideas? What do you think of Adam's idea as well? Keen to hear everyone's feedback because we want these things to be discussed and talk about. That's really the crux of why we're here. Yeah. So let us know. But thank you for listening, Jacob. Thank you. I know it's another late one on a Thursday. I appreciate it. We'll try again a little bit earlier next time.
No, it's good fun, especially when you've got something, kind of that we can just have a discussion about, right? And there's no right or wrong answers. It's cliche, but it's true with this kind of stuff. And I'm interested to see what everybody else thinks as well. I've seen some comments on social media already, which we've spoken about. But yeah, the more conversation we can have with these kind of things, I think the better. And like you said at the end of the segment, it isn't just I hate you, I hate your idea, you're an idiot, what are you doing? Let's be sensible about it. But it will be interesting to see what people think.
100%. All right. Thank you all very much for listening at home. We appreciate your company. Remember, there was 3 podcasts this week. We had the A-League debrief on Monday. Paletti did a really cool interview with Nick Stoll, who is the producer behind all of those A-League talk shows that you've seen on YouTube. That was released on Wednesday. And then, of course, you've got this one as well. So plenty of content to keep you through the weekend. We'll see you Monday again for your A-League debrief for round 16. But yeah, thank you very much for listening. We'll see you then. Goodbye.